All right. Hi, Michael. Hi, Mo. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today is March 17th, 2013. And just before we get started, I wanted to go over a few quick rules before beginning. First, right now this conversation is being recorded. And after the conversation is complete, I'll be uploading this video to YouTube, to the internet. Is that okay with both of you?
Yes, sure.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we're all about our discussion staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone of our speakers. Are those rules fine with you?
Absolutely.
All right, great. So let's get our discussion started. Just for anyone who's watching this conversation now or who will be watching it later on in the future, would each of you mind just giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this subject? Michael, you can go first, and then Mo, you go afterwards.
Sure. In terms of who I am, I'm a grassroots Israel activist and educator in the San Francisco Bay Area, a strong defender of the right of the state of Israel to exist as the state of the Jewish people. And where does that come from? I could say actually with complete truth, my father was a Palestinian. He was born in Tel Aviv, Palestine, and then immigrated to the United States after that. And I have a strong connection and also a strong commitment to the rights of both the Jewish people and all other peoples in the region to their own rights of freedom and national self-determination.
Great. And Mo?
My name is Mo Diab. I'm a Palestinian American. I'm a human rights activist. I've been involved with the conflict for quite some time now. My family lives in Jerusalem, Palestine, and I've been back several times to visit. And growing up and visiting, I noticed the injustices that have really increased and grown there. I've seen the apartheid wall put up. I've seen the effects of the military occupation. And I just really wanted to get myself more involved to see if I could contribute in any way that I could make lives better for the Palestinians and Israelis as well.
Okay, great. So, we each determined that we were going to discuss, a one versus a two-state solution inside of Israel-Palestine. What is, the best route to take with that? So I'm happy to just jump into that item. So I guess, the best way to start off with that would be, Michael, what is your take on what is the best solution, for both of these peoples and both these, both of these peoples going forward?
Sure. The only solution in the long term to peace in the region is going to be two states, a state of the Jewish people and a state of the Palestinian people, living side by side in peace with mutual recognition of each other's legitimacy. This is what the United Nations called for in 1947. The Jewish state was established. Unfortunately, the Palestinian state was not. And that is something that does need to happen for there to be peace in the region. And the two-state solution rests on a number of legs: moral, historical, and legal. If you look at the moral rights, okay, every people has the right to national self-determination in at least a portion of their historic homeland. The only homeland of the Jewish people is in the land of Israel, the only place that the Jews are indigenous to. And I grant the Palestinian people the same right to freedom and national self-determination in a portion of their historic homeland. And that's the basis, peace and mutual recognition. To allow the rights of one party and deny to another people the same right is a really just unacceptable form of discrimination. Now, you look historically. There was a Jewish nation in only one place, and it was, of course, the land that is now Israel, Palestine. The fact that the that the Jewish people were exiled from it for many years doesn't change the fact that there was 3,000 years of uninterrupted presence in that land. It is the land that has been the center of the Jewish people's attention, turned towards it when we pray, mentioned in our prayers at our holiest times of the year, for centuries. Next year in Jerusalem. And the history of the Jewish people in the land isn't from the Bible. It's literally carved into the land. You can go anywhere in the land of Israel, and the archaeological record speaks for itself. This is where the Jewish people came from. And finally, there is a legal basis, and it is not the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947, because, as I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later in the conversation, General Assembly resolutions are opinions. They are not binding. They do not make international law. International law is made only by treaties between countries. And at the time, in the 1920s, the mandate system through the League of Nations did comprise international law. It was based on treaties that were made. And that is how Jordan came to be a country. It is how Lebanon and Syria became independent countries. It's how Iraq became an independent country. And it is how a Jewish state and a Palestinian state were going to be formed in that land. So you have moral, historical, and legal basis for it. And the only way forward is going to be two states. The trend all over the world is for individual peoples to want their own national self-determination. Look what happened with the fall of the Soviet Union. When it collapsed, all of the individual peoples, the Azeris, the Armenians, the Moldovans, the Georgians, all wanted their own rights of national self-determination, their own independent countries. Sometimes the fall apart is peaceful, like it was more or less in the former Soviet Union, like it was between the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Sometimes it's not peaceful. Look at Ethiopia and Eritrea. Look at Sudan and South Sudan. But the trend all over the world is for individual peoples to have those rights. And the places where you see the most conflict is where this doesn't occur. Look at the internecine conflicts going on in Syria that have gone on for generations in Lebanon. This is not the future that I think any of us want for the people of Israel and the people of Palestine.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say that I think that anybody has the right to live where they choose to live. Now, when it comes to ties to the land, you said all Jewish people have a right to go back to their historic homeland. Given that Judaism is a religion now, I understand it's become somewhat of an identity. The original people who lived in Israel that were Jewish were the Hebrews. They were the Semites who were Hebrews. So saying that it's people who can convert to Judaism or anybody who is Jewish of a different, maybe European descent, they don't have any actual ancestral ties to the land, like the Arabs who have ties to the land, who were in the Levant for many years. And just to clarify, you said that the Jews had an uninterrupted rule for 3,000 years?
There's an uninterrupted presence in the land.
Okay, and where did you get that information from?
Look at archaeology. Jews lived in the Galilee for uninterrupted presence. The historical record of contemporary writers is very, very clear. They were, of course, banned from Jerusalem by the Romans, but Jewish communities began returning to the city of Jerusalem after the end of Roman rule. And contemporary writers and archaeology absolutely support this.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't under Jewish rule for 3,000 years.
Oh, absolutely not. It had not been under Jewish rule since the fall of the Roman conquest in the year 73. Absolutely.
Okay. Because I believe a lot of the time when historical references are made, they're misrepresented, and I'm not really one to talk about the historical references. I mean, no one's going to deny that there were Arabs in Palestine for thousands of years, and there were Hebrews in Palestine as well. So, I mean, that's just a fact, and that really can't be refuted from any point. Now, moving forward from that point to where we are now, I think it's important to, once again, I did this in the last debate too, to recognize what is holding up this peace process from a one or two-state solution, and why a two-state solution isn't a viable option anymore, opposed to a one-state solution, which we're closer to, because the conditions are like a one-state solution now. in an apartheid state with unequal discriminatory rights. What do you feel is necessary for the Palestinians on their end and the Israelis on their end in order for a two-state solution to work?
Okay, let me, before I answer that question, I'd like to just correct a couple of misstatements you made. First of all, the Jewish people are at fault. Okay? When incorrectly the Palestinians are told, well, you're not a genuine people. Okay? Your response to that is probably quite negative, and you don't feel that someone else has the right to define your peoplehood for you. And by the same token, you or anybody else gets to define if the Jewish people consider themselves a people. Okay? A people is defined by the dictionary is a group, a common history, ties to a common land, a common language, and a common heritage. And the Jewish people absolutely do fit that. And the fact that while many Jews indeed had been in Europe for hundreds of years, genetic studies published very recently show that there was more genetic similarity between Jews whose heritage is in Europe, such as myself, and Jews from the Middle East and North Africa than between Jews from Europe and their non-Jewish neighbors from the same country in Europe. So the fact is that science backs the fact that there is indeed a coherent entity called the Jewish people. So with all due respect, you don't get to define it just as a religion. If we define ourselves as a people, we have just as much right to do that as the Palestinians have to define themselves as a people. So it is not just a religion. Now, to answer your question...
I'm sorry, I understand that maybe misunderstood what I was saying. What I was saying is, if you want to speak it, I mean, scientifically or through research, I mean, the people that lived in the region were the Semites, the people from the origin of Semitic languages. So research has shown there's an estimated about 270 million Semites living today. Of those 270 million Semites living today, 206 million, which is about 85%, are native Arabic speakers. Only about 2.5% of them are of Hebrew descent, of Hebrew language. So direct ties to the land. I'm not saying you can't define a Jewish group with a religion, with a culture, with the people. I completely agree that you can. I'm just speaking strictly from the origins of the land, of the Levant, of the Arab Peninsula. So
sure, but right, and that may be fine, but the land of Israel and Palestine is really not, even though it's geographically close, it is not historically, culturally, or in any sense part of the same historical background as the Arabian Peninsula, from which the conquest of the area did happen indeed in the 7th century, and that's the area, the Arabian Peninsula, from which conquest and Arab people and the Arabic language spread across the area. Now, let's address your question of what Israelis and Palestinians need to do. It's very clear. There's a Israeli writer, very well respected, named Yossi Klein Halevi. And I'm going to paraphrase the quote because I don't have it exactly in front of me. He basically said, the only solution is that for Palestinians to give up what they feel might be a right of return to Haifa and Tel Aviv, and at the same time for the Jewish people to give up what we feel might be a right of return to our places, our ancestral places such as Hebron and Bethlehem, and for each side to give up. Okay? That is going to be very key. The other thing, clearly, and even the past 4 prime ministers of Israel have recognized that Israel is going to have to make very, very substantial withdrawals from the areas in the West Bank that now controls. There is absolutely no question about that, because you have to be able to create a viable, functional state of Palestine that is going to be able to live in peace and mutual recognition and mutual security with the Jewish state of Israel. That absolutely has to happen. On the Palestinian side, what has to happen is the recognition that this is going to happen, the giving up of the dream of returning Haifa and Tel Aviv to Arab control, and to start educating their people for peace. When Palestinian children are educated that Haifa is a port of Palestine, that it's a Palestinian city, that Sfat is a Palestinian city. And that's just on Palestinian Authority TV. Let's not even go into what Hamas is doing, okay? The people on both sides need to be educated and acceptance of peace. Now, the last four prime ministers of Israel have explicitly called for the creation of a Palestinian state. And what we need on the other side is for Palestinian leaders to agree to live in peace alongside the state of the Jewish people.
Yeah, and now can I just, Mo, do you have any initial response that you want to throw out there? Otherwise, I have like just a initial question I'd ask. Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, to the point of the right of return, do you believe that the Palestinians have a right of return?
No, not to the state of Israel. No.
So here's the thing: the Jews felt that they had a right to return to their homeland for several thousands of years, and they eventually found their way back to their homeland and established a Jewish state.
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians have been displaced for 65 years. The Jews fought for several thousand years to their homeland. There is no conceivable way that the Palestinians are going to give up the right of return to their homeland after 65 years. And you should be able to understand this coming from Jewish origin, to know that the Jews fought for their homeland for several thousands of years. So that is something that will never happen. It's unrealistic. There are Palestinians living today that still have most of their family living there, and they have roots in the land, they have their culture in the land, and that's something that they're never going to give up, and they cannot give up. It's very unrealistic and insensible to think that that's something that they would give up. That is something that must be accepted by Israel. The right of return, it's every like you said, the Jewish people, they're an identity. That's what you were defining it as. The Palestinians have their culture there. They have family there. They have historical ties there. They have landmarks there. Every people have the right to a land, to call their land, to be proud of, to be able to go there and call their homeland. So this is something that really cannot be given up by the Palestinians, and it cannot be asked of them to give up. The Palestinians have compromised time after time. You mentioned that the last four prime ministers have called for a Palestinian state. Now, yes, in the newspapers and to the public, yes, they have. But what were the preconditions that were given to the Palestinians in asking them to live side by side with a Palestinian state? These are things that needs to be really recognized, because most of them are misunderstood by the public, and it makes it seem like the Palestinians are the ones who are the more stubborn ones that haven't compromised. Israel has not compromised with this peace process. They've come to the table, and one, the right of return has been removed, and that is something that the Palestinians will never accept. The Israel demands that the Palestinians recognize Israel's right to exist, and in essence, that means the legitimacy of the Palestinians from their homes, because by accepting that, they're accepting that they will not have the right of return. Two, renounce violence. Now, how can they renounce violence when Israel came to the last few peace process, the last few peace treaties? They made it very clear. They gave 14 preconditions to any type of peace treaty. And one of those is that Israel does not have to cease violence and incitement against the Palestinians. They made that very clear, and this can be looked up. So why would the Palestinians renounce violence when the Israelis made it clear that that is not an objective for them? It's just something that's double standard, and it doesn't make sense. In a peace process, both sides have to have that mutual respect and mutual agreements. If one side says, we agree to peace, the other says, we don't have to agree to peace, that's not a peace process. Also now, Israel says that they have to accept the past agreements, in particular the roadmap to the quartet. Now, how can they agree to that when they've already destroyed that roadmap, and they've already said now with U.S. support that they will not follow that roadmap? So yes, in the eye, it does seem like Israel has come to the table for a peace process many times. But the preconditions, they're leaving the Palestinians with nothing. There will not be a viable state. There is no possible way for a two-state solution at this point. How can there be a two-state solution? They've taken away any type of economy. Now, and any type of homeland that could be viable for a Palestinian state. And now back to if it was the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, which was agreed upon for the Palestinian state. how is that possible now with all of the settlements going throughout the West Bank and the recently renovated settlements and built settlements in E1 in East Jerusalem? It's just not possible now. It's something that could have worked before maybe the Oslo Accords in the early 90s, but now there is no possible way to realistically do that. And I just don't see it. I mean, I think moving forward now, looking at a one-state solution, that is where equality comes in, and that is the only way to make sure that there is a binational solution with non-discriminatory laws between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and with the right of the return for the Palestinians, and that is not denying the right of return for the Jews. If the Jews feel that they can go to their homeland, Palestinians have the right to return to their homeland as well. It's only fair. It's the only thing that can happen. Keep in mind now, the Jews came to Palestine. So to tell someone that they cannot come back to a land that they had lived in for generations, that is, it's simple. I mean, anyone can tell you that that's not right. To tell someone they can't come back when you were the population that came in and pushed them out.
All right, so let's address a couple of the points that you made. First of all, regardless, we could sit here all day and point fingers and say, well, you know, the Israelis undermined the peace process this way, the Palestinians undermined it this way, and I'm sure you could say many things to the first point, and I could say many things to the second point. One thing I hope that we could agree on is that there is only one way to resolve all of those issues, and that is by negotiations between the parties, which I think absolutely do need to take place. And I would hope that the president's upcoming visit would help start some amount of negotiations, because ultimately you're going to settle things two ways. One is through negotiations, the other one is through violence, and I'm certainly much, much more in favor of the first than the second. Okay? Now, let's talk about, because it really is, I think, the heart of the issue, what you describe as return. Let's talk about what rights are. Okay? When Jews came back to Palestine, when it was under Ottoman rule, when it was under rule by previous kingdoms, they came back under the laws of the governing body at that time. When they came back to Ottoman Palestine, they had to live under those laws. They came in legally according to the rules there. They bought land at exorbitant prices under the laws of the Ottoman Empire. So all of this was done not as a right. It was done because they came back, they followed the laws, they followed the procedures. They came in. This was not some mass illegal immigration into the area. And they didn't come back because they were given international right to do so. Now, let's talk about what actual international rights do exist for refugees from a conflict, okay? And there is such a thing as international refugee law. Again, international law established only by treaties between countries, not by the United Nations, and certainly not by the United Nations General Assembly. Refugee law grants individual refugees, not their descendants, the right to return to their previous homes at the cessation of the conflict. The cessation of the conflict is only marked by a treaty that ends the conflict, some type of peace treaty. So that is international refugee law. Outside of that, there is no right of return for any descendants of the refugees. Now, when you talk about the Jews returning to the state of Israel, that is a privilege, a right, is granted to me, to other Jews, by the sovereign act of the state of Israel, which, as every country does, has the legal right to decide who may immigrate into its country and who may become citizens. And Israel is far from the only country to grant specific immigration privileges to members of the ethnic group of whose country that is. I'll give you a very short, partial list of other countries that do the same thing. China, Russia, India, Japan, Korea, Turkey, Greece, Germany, Italy. That's just a very short list right there off the top of my head. It's many, many countries have these very similar laws. Someone whose grandparent is Irish and never lived there, the government of Ireland grants them the right. This is not international law, right? This is a right granted by that individual country. So, as much as it will probably pain you to hear this, you, as a Palestinian, a descendant of Palestinians, do not have any international right whatsoever to return and become citizens of any country unless that country grants you that right. And I cannot go knock on the doors of places that my grandparents came from and demand the right to become a citizen there, again, unless that country, in its own sovereign act, has granted me that right. So let's be very careful when we talk about what right of return actually is. Now, unfortunately, I'm very, very saddened to hear you say, the Palestinians will never give up that right, because let's look at what that would mean in practice, okay? There's approximately right now in Israel 6 million Jews and 1 million non-Jews. And there are approximately, and correct me if I'm wrong, around, between the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians living in the West Bank, and the Palestinians living elsewhere, not just surrounding Arab countries, but in the United States, Canada, wherever they may have to live. Maybe approximately 6 to 7 million Palestinians. If all of those Palestinians decided to immigrate into Israel, if Israel were forced at the point of a gun to grant the people the right of entry to become citizens, Israel now becomes a state of approximately 7 to 8 million Palestinians and about 6 million Jews. And at that point, it ceases to become the state of the Jewish people, and the rights of the Jewish people to national self-determination have been eradicated. And unfortunately, not only their rights, but even their own safety may be at risk, as has unfortunately been shown by the experience of Jews in Arab countries, not only after, but even preceding the establishment of the State of Israel, when a greater number of refugees, approximately 850,000, were created by deliberate acts of the Arab governments against Jewish communities that have been living there for centuries with perhaps second-class citizenship rights, and that have not been engaged in violence against their neighbors. And let's look at why the Palestinian refugee problem was created. In 1947, the Jews accepted the plan for a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Arab leadership, the Arab High Committee, and the surrounding Arab countries rejected it, and they went to war against their Jewish neighbors. And what followed was what happened in India and Pakistan, what happened in Europe after World War II. You had a population exchange. Had the war against the Jews not been started, there would have been no Palestinian refugee population. And unfortunately, history does not give people the right to a do-over, to say, we went to war against you, we lost, but we get to come back and try again. And that is unfortunately what happens in history.
I'm listening to what you're saying, but I think it's very distorted in its context of time. If the Israelis and the Palestinians had lived side by side for many years and this was some kind of civil war or civil dispute, yeah, what you're saying could be understood in some sense. However, what you're not recognizing or mentioning or including in this entire equation is that the Palestinians were living there for many, many, many generations. It was not the Palestinians who went into Palestine and displaced and expropriated land and began an ethnic cleansing operation. It was the Jews who came in. Yes, they did buy land. Yes, they did buy land legally. However, much of the Palestinian land that was taken was the majority of the country. There were 750,000 Palestinians that were ethnically cleansed and displaced. They were living there. When an outside source comes in, that is where the problem comes in. If there was not this problem before, you have to look at the factors that cause the problem. So for you to say that it's the Palestinians that are to blame for this, or it's the Palestinians that need to compromise more, or the Palestinians that can't come back to their own land. The name is Palestine. It's been called Palestine throughout the Ottoman Empire. The Romans named it Palestine. Palestinian people have lived in Palestine. You have to understand and recognize that there will be no type of sustainable peace process if that isn't recognized on both ends. If you're saying that the Palestinians do not have the right of return to their own land, and the Palestinians and the Palestinian refugee problem was caused by themselves, the Palestinian refugee problem was caused because they were displaced. There was a Jewish operation by the name of the Village Fellows that carried out the ethnic cleansing of virtually the entire land of Palestine. That is what caused the displacement, nothing else. They would go into villages, completely, some were complete massacres where they would murder everyone, and many of them were complete ethnic cleansing operations where they would force the populations to leave. They would put them in tents, they would put them in mud huts, and they would tell them that they would have the right to consume. So the displacement problem cannot be confused by Palestinians' fault. They were displaced because an outside group came in and terrorized them and forced them to leave. That is a fact. If you deny the Palestinian Nakba, ethnic cleansing, that's just ridiculous. That's been documented by Israeli historians. That's been documented by Ben Gurion. That's been documented by several Israeli prime ministers. That is the way that Israel's inception came into being.
Can you give me a quote?
It's not rational for you to say this. You have to accept that that is how Israel came into being, and that the population is that. And if you're a rational person, you will see it this way: they were displaced in order to make this right. I mean, not right, and to make it better, they need to have the right to return to their land. And you're saying the right of return is illegal-minded? The Jews talked about a right of return to their land, and from what you're saying, it seems like a desire to return to land. I believe what you said, a desire to return. 2,000 years, and 3,000 years, and they came back to Palestine to live in their homeland. When they were buying land there, yes, it wasn't a perfect situation, but there were Jews in Palestine for many, many years, many generations. And they did work with Palestinians, and there was a sustainable coexistence. So if it was a one-state solution and the Jews wanted to live in Palestine, that could have worked. Yes, there was much Arab refusal to the idea of that, but there have been Jews in the area and living together with the Palestinians, and that has worked. But to say that the Palestinians cannot come back to their land is just ridiculous. How will there ever be a peace process or a lasting peace if that option is not even considered? It's not an option. It's the only choice that there is to make this work. And two states, I think saying that you agree with the two-state solution is ignoring the current conditions on the ground right now. In the Palestinian state, which has been agreed upon by Israel and Palestine, there are thousands of settlements that are built through the Palestinian state. How do you expect a Palestinian state to be viable under these conditions? Israel has been in the first place.
Yeah, and if we want to actually talk about what, real action items and things that would need to take place, how do you actually see each one of your solutions playing out? That might be a good idea. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Well, first of all, I do generally adapt in the course of any kind of discussion to the statement that if you were a rational person, you would have to say, which means if you disagree with me, then you must be irrational. I'm not going to make that statement to you, and I would ask that you not make that statement to me. The history of the entire conflict has had people on different sides saying different things. And there's a very, very good named Benny Morris who wrote a number of books on the conflict. His most recent book, 1948, very, very interesting book. And it points out that indeed there were some incidents of ethnic cleansing of Arab civilians by the Haganah, most particularly around the towns of Ramla and Lod. There's no question that this happened. That is correct. However, he also points out several things that I think are worth bringing into discussion. Number one, more than half of the Palestinian Israelis fled without ever having laid eyes upon an Israeli soldier. That's more than half the population right there, okay? And if you look at it...
You're going to have to check that. I don't see that. I've read many, many sources. And I'm
going to ask you not to interrupt me since I didn't interrupt you. The second point that Morris makes, and again, you can look this up, Benny Morris, 1948, very readable book. If you want to look at ethnic cleansing, okay, at the end of the war, when there was an armistice that was signed, there were approximately, I think, 150,000 Arabs who were left within the borders of the state of Israel. They became citizens, and their descendants who live there are citizens of Israel today. So that was a pretty feeble job of ethnic cleansing if they ended up with a population that was 20% Arab. On the other side of the lines, in areas that were illegally occupied, Jordan on the one hand being the West Bank, and Egypt on the other hand being Gaza, you know the answer, Mo, to how many Jews were left alive in those areas. And the answer is zero. So we have to ask who really was engaged in ethnic cleansing, okay? In terms of any type of refugee population, none of the Palestinian refugee population left until after the UN partition vote, when the Arab Higher Committee rejected it. The fighters sent their families abroad. Elite left because they knew there was going to be fighting. That was the start of the Palestinian refugee population when they announced their hostilities against the Jews. So again, you're going to look at ethnic cleansing, and let's also look at what happened to the Jews in the Middle East and North Africa. 850,000 of them who were not involved in firing guns at their neighbors' farms, who were not involved in firing guns at their neighbors' homes, who were not involved in blocking roads and attacking convoys full of food and water, who were not laying siege to their neighbors' cities. This was a population that was ethnically cleansed. Okay? Now, if you talk about the facts on the ground, okay? Now there you bring up a very legitimate concern that's been raised by a number of people on both sides of the issue. And this is a very, very important point. Have facts on the ground gotten to the point that would make a two-state solution impossible? Some people like you say yes, other people say no, but even the people who say no are absolutely concerned that in the future it could head this way. So you bring up a very, very important and valid point here. I would direct you and all those who are listening here. There was a very, very good 4-part series that was done in the Atlantic. It's on Atlantic.com sometime last year. And if any of the folks in the chat room can go and look at this and maybe post the URL for the benefit of everybody else, a really well done, very, very factually in-depth 4-part series on looking at the 4 issues, the 4 main core issues that currently divide Israelis and Palestinians, and saying how could they be solved. And if I remember correctly, the 4 issues were, of course, borders, which involves settlements, water rights, refugees, and Jerusalem. Okay? Very well done in-depth analysis of this. And under the border section, there are a number of borders that can be drawn with a relatively small percentage, somewhere around, I guess, 1.5 to 3% across the green line, that can involve incorporating the great majority of the settlers who do live very, very close to the green line into Israel, future Palestinian state, to be compensated by land swaps of land of equal value from Israel to essentially, in terms of land area, make them whole. And, of course, Israel would need to evacuate the rest of the settlements. Now, people say, well, this can't be done. People say the same thing about a peace treaty with Egypt in 1977. Oh, Israel's never going to evacuate the Sinai settlement. It's impossible. It can't be done. And indeed, it was done. What Israelis are looking for is a partner on the other side to say that if Israel withdraws from the land, they will not be met as they were in southern Lebanon and in Gaza with rocket fire on their cities against their civilians. They will be met with peace, mutual recognition, and the end of the conflict. That is what needs to happen on the ground.
I agree with the concept of that, and I really do wish that was possible. I do wish it was possible for a two-state solution still, and I think that if they did withdraw the settlements from the illegally occupied territories, I think that would be possible, and I think if Israel would recognize the Palestinians, which they haven't recognized the Palestinians, they've said that they were willing to work on a two-state solution. It's never really been with good faith intentions. And I think blame needs to be put on not just the Palestinian side for this, but I mean the Israeli side as well, and in Israeli politics. So for you to say that, I mean, if you followed the peace process, which I'm sure you have, what are the preconditions? Why has the peace process failed time after time? What is the major disagreement? They were very, very close in a couple of the last peace processes. Why did it fall through?
Sure. I think there is plenty of blame on both sides, and please, do not take what I'm saying as blaming solely the Palestinians. There are opportunities that were missed on both sides, and there is absolutely no question about it. Okay, the formula that has been on the table for years, has been land for peace, and this is basically what needs to happen. Israel needs to, in the end, withdraw from the largest part of the West Bank, and they will do that only in exchange for peace. Now, the concern on the part of both Israelis and many of their supporters like myself is when we hear people say what you have said, that the Palestinians will never give up, they see as a right of return to the state of Israel itself. Because Israelis correctly see that this is a call for the elimination of the Jewish state. And Israelis are not going to have much of an appetite for withdrawing from the West Bank to put their population centers and their international airport within range of the same kind of rockets that have been launched from Gaza now for years and years. So as long as the official position of the Palestinian leadership is that there needs to be this forced repatriation of great-grandchildren of refugees into the state of Israel itself, that right now is the biggest obstacle for Israelis to be able to make peace. And what I would say is probably the biggest obstacle on the part of the Palestinians that the Israelis are doing is Israel's occupation. Each side is going to have to give those things up. Israel is going to have to end its presence in the bulk of the West Bank.
Okay. Like I said, I agree with much of what you're saying, but I still feel it's a little bit out of context. And just like you said, that the Jews deserve a homeland and want a homeland. Do you disagree that Palestinians deserve a homeland as well?
No, I don't disagree at all. No, I absolutely agree with that. And again, I'm going back to Klein Halevi's statement. I'm addressing you as, the Palestinian, the room area, but essentially all Palestinians, I would say, you have to give up what you see as your right of return to Haifa and Tel Aviv. And I, speaking references, the Jewish people and the Israeli Jews, have to give up what many Jews see as our right of return to all of our historic homeland. You're going to get a part of our historic homeland. You're going to get a part of your historic homeland. And absolutely, totally, any Palestinian should have the right of return to a future Arab state of Palestine. There's no reason why that should not happen. And what was really discouraging was to hear the PA's ambassador to Lebanon say that even Palestinians who were living in refugee camps in the West Bank would not be able to become citizens of a Palestinian state that would be established there. To me, this is very, very troubling. A Palestinian state should be the homeland for the Palestinian people in the same way that the state of Israel is the homeland and the exercise of the right of national self-determination for the Jewish people.
I agree with that, and the problem is it's not what you're saying, it's that what the preconditions are to these peace talks. Under a two-state solution, Israel has made it very clear that even under a two-state solution, the Palestinians would not have a right to return to the Palestinian state.
No, I'm sorry, no, that is absolutely not true. The Israeli leaders have said very, very explicitly, this is exactly what they should have, the right to return to a Palestinian state. This is what President Bush said. This is what President Obama said. And please, you cannot find a statement from an Israeli leader disagreeing with that.
Can you provide me with the peace process that this was said? Because from my research and my understanding, that was one of the preconditions, and that's why one of the last peace processes had fallen through.
I would be very happy, and I'll be able to look and email information to you, through Max later. No, I think this is very, very fair policy of the state of Israel. And you want to talk about peace negotiations, okay? Issues are only going to be settled by negotiations. Again, you and I can talk about here what it could look like, but ultimately, we're not going to be the ones in the room. The leaders are going to be the ones in the room, and the only by negotiations. Now, what I heard in the United Nations in September was Prime Minister Netanyahu saying to President Abbas, let's negotiate right here, right now. I'll come to Ramallah when I get back. You come to Jerusalem when I get back. Let's sit down and negotiate. And unfortunately, what I've seen out of Abbas was a refusal to negotiate. Okay? So, if you're in favor of negotiations between the parties, wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. I would love to see the leadership of the Palestinian Authority adopt the same position. I would love to be able to see President Obama's visit kickstart those negotiations, because that is the only way we're going to get to peace. But if you want to be realistic about it, if you expect a leadership of the Jewish state of Israel to accept a position that is opposed by approximately 95% of Jewish Israelis, that of the so-called one-state solution, let's be realistic. That's not going to happen. And if the position of the Palestinian leadership is going to be that, well, if we don't get the right to overrun Israel demographically by negotiations, then we're simply going to continue to go to war against it, that's very disheartening. That's peace. That's not mutual recognition. That's not mutual acceptance. That's not coexistence.
I understand what you're saying, and like I said, I agree that if there was a possibility for a two-state solution, it would have the right of return. However, I have read many sources, and I've actually read the actual minutes and the transcripts from many of the peace talks in which the Israeli representatives and committees, including the Prime Minister, have rejected the right of return for Palestinians, period. So if you could provide me with some sort of source that has been documented and that is credible, that says that some sort of Israeli committee in the higher government has said that they approve for a Palestinian right of return to an independent Palestinian state, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Okay. No, great. So this is wonderful, because I will absolutely be able to get that to you. So, what they have rejected in terms of minutes that you've read absolutely would be rejecting granting such a right to Israel itself. But would you agree then? So let me ask that spot here. If there were to be established a Palestinian state, with the agreement being that it live in peace and mutual recognition with Israel, the state of the Jewish people, and that the Palestinian people, wherever they may be living, and even for Palestinians living in Israel, if they chose, hey, I'd rather be a citizen of Arab Palestine, that all of those Palestinians would be granted that right to return to the Arab state of Palestine, would you then agree that that is a just and viable two-state solution?
I would agree with that, given that the Palestinian state has this right to its self-determination and sovereignty. It has the right to protect itself, and it has the right to fully develop as a country. And obviously in peace alongside with the Jewish state. However, I don't see Israel allowing the Palestinian state to develop as a country, considering that they have crippled and put sanctions on Gaza, and they've kept it on the brink of economic and humanitarian crisis. So I think hypothetically, yes, I think that would be a just solution. I don't necessarily agree with the two-state solution, but I think that could be a solution that could be viable, and that those conditions are met. Do I think that those conditions would be met and compromised and agreed upon by the current Israeli government? No, I don't think that currently that they are willing to compromise and do that. So,
that's a matter now of speculation on both of our parts. But I must say that I'm pleasantly surprised, because I really did not expect that you would say that, and I am delighted to hear you say that, because that is really the core of the issue. I think for you, as you've described it, and as I've read it from many other folks on your side, is the ultimate fate of the Palestinian refugees, many of whom still live locked by their fellow Arabs in refugee camps, which is a historical crime of monumental proportions. And I think that if you would agree with what you just said there, that is really the moral, the practical solution for those Palestinian refugees and their descendants. And it is the truly only way that you're going to avoid a future of either unending war to try to eliminate the state of Israel, or a basically Lebanon or Chechnya or Rwanda, Bosnia type of warfare between groups both struggling for control of a country. So I'm very, very happy to hear that you said that, and I'll be very happy to go ahead and research the information as soon as we're done. Send it to Max. Max, I'll ask if you can post whatever links I send you on the Facebook page as well, and I think that would be very, very educational for all the folks who are watching this.
Yeah, it's not a problem.
Yeah, I definitely like to see those sources. Just because,
sure.
Like I said, from my research, I mean, from actually reading the minutes of these peace process and these accords, I've actually read verbatim from prime ministers and the selected officials who represent Israel that have clearly stated that the right of return is something that must be accepted not to happen. The Palestinians have to accept that it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen to the state of Israel, absolutely. Right, not in terms of the future Arab state of Palestine. No. Anyway, and I think again, all of our viewers here will be able to go ahead and look this up for themselves as well.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
So, two things that I was just going to ask. One, Michael, on your end, you seem to be pretty consistent on this, on a two-state solution, and you bring up that the Israeli government, the past 2 or 3 prime ministers have been all for that. What's your reasoning behind why they're not in favor of a one-state solution, which is what Mo thinks would be best? I mean, what is your particular reason for that? And then my question to you, Mo, was Michael makes the point about recently Palestinian government, the governmental authorities of Palestine not even being willing to sit down and negotiate. What is your reasoning for why you think that is? And Michael, if you want to answer the question for your question, and then Mo, you can answer yours. That'd be great.
Sure. So why would the leadership of Israel be opposed to a one-state solution? Because again, as I pointed out, it ends the right of national self-determination for the Jewish people. When the Jewish people, once again, are no longer in control of their own destiny, their destiny is subject to the whim of others.
Aren't there things that can be? Aren't there things
Muslim world in the 12th century that work fine?
Are there things that can be done though? Are there things that can be done to allow the Jewish people to continue to have their right to self-determination? I mean.
Well, yeah, and actually one of the biggest things, and this was pointed out actually when I attended the APAC Policy Conference in Washington, D.C., which was just a week and a half ago. 2 speakers, Israeli Ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, and Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak, both got up in front of thousands and thousands of people, and the videos are online. You can go search them. They're on YouTube under APAC Policy Conference 2013. And they both talked about the need for a Palestinian state, not just for the Palestinian people, but also for the state of Israel. They're recognizing that this is necessary, that the current situation cannot go on indefinitely, and that the way that you preserve Israel as the state of the Jewish people is to make sure that the Palestinians have a safe and secure future for themselves as well, and be able to get to exercise their rights of national self-determination.
Great. And Mo, do you have any answer to my question before for you?
The question of why Palestinians aren't willing to negotiate? Or
yeah. I mean, just even to sit down at a negotiating table, the authorities that represent the Palestinian people.
Well, they have come to the table many times, and time after time, things have been agreed upon. and they've been fulfilled. They haven't been put into action. And this is just you can view the peace processes, and you can review the conditions that were agreed upon, and it's just not happening. So every time that these peace talks fall through, the Palestinian side is clearly going to be more cautious to come to the table of conditions, and there are not good faith intentions in these peace talks. How can you one day talk about an independent Palestinian state while you are currently constructing legal settlements in occupied Palestinian territory? It's a very hypocritical thing to do. You can't expect the Palestinian Authority to come to the table with high hopes and agree on many conditions and negotiate and compromise again while these settlements are being constructed. It's just extremely sad to look at it that way. But there are not good faith intentions in this peace process, and I think it is possible. But what is said, what is put down on paper, has to actually happen, and then trust will be earned and further developed on both sides. But the way it is right now, it has not been a good faith intentions in the peace talks.
Now, Mo brings up a very valid point here, okay, so I'd like to build on that, okay? But, it's not just one side. You bring up a very legitimate point that can absolutely, totally be questioned, that why does Israel then still continue, to construct in settlements in the territories, okay? And I would point out that on the Palestinian side, the very first sentence of the first paragraph of the roadmap, which was agreed to by the Palestinians, said, and this is again going back to 2005 when this came out, or 4, that the Palestinian Authority will dismantle the terror groups, the illegal militias that are operating there, and of course, they didn't do that as well. So again, there's plenty of finger pointing that can be done on both sides. I would point any of our viewers, as well as both of you, to a very well-written piece by Dennis Ross in the Sunday New York Times 2 weeks ago tomorrow. And he laid out very, very clearly steps that both sides can take as a way of building trust. For example, on the Israeli side, stop any construction in settlements that are beyond where the security barrier is right now. Okay? Because it is extraordinary here that those settlements in a future peace settlement would not remain part of the state of Israel. Okay? That's on the Israeli side. On the Palestinian side, talked about stopping the public delegitimization of the Jewish history of the land, the delegitimization of Jewish history in Jerusalem. He came out with 6 steps on both sides, and I would strongly recommend that to everyone to read it. Very, very well-written piece. I'd also like to point out, Kenneth in the chat room posted a link which exactly has what I was saying. It's to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs site. It's about now, I think, 10 comments up. And the link is right there. And if you go to it, okay, I'm going to read from Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. This is June 2011, okay? And basically, in terms of the Palestinian state, the Palestinians, if they choose, go there. And if the Jews, maybe choose that, go here, okay? He's talking about the idea of a Palestinian state to which the Palestinians can go, okay? So the statements about, from Israeli leaders about a Palestinian state are on that link. And again, I'm sure it would not be difficult to find others as well. But Kenneth, thank you for posting that link.
Right, and guys, I just wanted to say Raphael's made a few postings in the bottom of the chat room. I have to just go and begin recording a new discussion on Syria, so I just want to thank each of you for your time, and thanks so much for joining and participating, and I'll speak with both of you very soon. But I know there's some people who have been posting some items. If both of you want to stick around for a minute, that would be great.
Sure. That's fine. So just to respond to the questions people are posting in the chat room, Max?
Yeah, for as much time as you have, whatever you'd like, okay?
That's fine.
Great. Thank you so much.